Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Now, owing to the madness of one single person, innocent people, including children and women, continue to lose their precious lives. Yes, we are talking about the madness of one person, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Despite the repeated calls from all the quarters from across the world by the world leaders of humanitarian pauses, a ceasefire, he continues with his offensive on the besieged Gaza Strip. Now he has launched an offensive on the last part of Gaza Strip, Rafah, where almost half of the Gaza's population is crammed as a last refuge. Over 1.4 million people are there taking refuge and shelter. Now, according to Gaza's health ministry, around 28,340 people have been killed since 7th of October in Israel's relentless, indiscriminate and disproportionate bombardment and ground invasion in the Gaza Strip. 67,984 people have been wounded as a result of this brutality on the part of Israeli regime. Now, specifically when we talk about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he has vowed to press on with the offensive, saying only continued military pressure until complete victory will result in the release of all our hostages. And he has also said that victory is in reach. Israel would provide safe passage for civilians in the southern city of Rafah. Now, at the same time, Israeli military has claimed that it struck a number of the alleged terror targets in Shabura district of Rafah, and the strikes had concluded. It also announced that in an overnight operation in Rafah, it had rescued 2 captives taken by the Palestinian resistance group on October the 7th, at the same time saying that those hostages were in good condition. Now, at the same time, we have seen international leaders warning Israeli regime against pressing ahead with their offensive in Rafah, particularly when we talk about US President Joe Biden. He warned Israeli Prime Minister not to launch offensive on Rafah without a credible and executable plan to ensure safety of the people sheltering in the city. Earlier, we had also seen President Joe Biden had described Israel's bombardment of Gaza as over the top last week. Similarly, there are certain warnings that have been issued by other world leaders, which include EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell. He had said that it would lead to an unspeakable humanitarian catastrophe. Likewise, UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron said over half of Gaza's population are sheltering in the area, and he has also urged for stopping this particular offensive. Saudi Arabia has also warned of very serious repercussions if Rafah was stormed. Jordan's foreign minister's spokesperson, Ambassador Sufyan, also said that the kingdom's absolute rejection of the displacement of the Palestinians within or outside their land. We have also seen a statement that has come from a Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let me quote it. Israel is officially continuing to target civilians and transfer the war to Rafah to push the population to get displaced under bombardment. The recent massacres of the occupation are evidence of validity of international warnings and fears of catastrophe results of the expansion of the war to Rafah. Netanyahu commits mass massacres with a mentality of revenge, not victory, and in accordance with the international law. Also, Israel does not care about the lives of the Palestinian civilians and considers them as the collateral damage. Also, another major development, we have seen a Dutch court has ordered its government to halt the delivery of parts for F-35 jets used by Israel in its bombardment of the Gaza Strip. And it has been quoted as saying that there is a clear risk that the parts the Netherlands is exporting are being used in serious violations of international humanitarian law. We'll be talking about all these major developments regarding as to the catastrophe that is unfolding in the Gaza Strip due to relentless, unstoppable bombardment on the part of Israeli regime on the innocent people in Gaza. And to take all these aspects for discussion in today's show, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Jauhar Saleem, his former ambassador. Mr. Saleem, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Also, at the same time on Skype, we are honored to have been joined by Lieutenant General retired Talat Masood. He is senior analyst. General Masood, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on this show tonight. Really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you. Mr. Ambassador, now when we talk about this particular claim by the Israeli military in particular, it is claimed to have taken 2 captives back, also saying at the same time that the hostages were in good condition. I would like to start the discussion from this particular thing, that when they claim that the hostages are in good condition. Almost over 4 months of this particular brutality on the part of Israeli regime, and these hostages retrieved are in good condition. What does that actually speak? 2 hostages retrieved in good condition, whereas compared to that number of casualties and deaths on the part of Gazans, which are 28,340. How do you compare the equation?
Yeah, that shows that the hostages, if they've said that the hostages have been found in good condition, so it's obviously that they have been treated well as per the international norms in such situations. But the more important point here is that the total number of hostages to begin with was said to be around 200. The Israelis claim that about 136 are still with Hamas. They also claim that 29 of the hostages have been killed so far, and that they have been killed because of the crossfire, because of the Israeli military operation itself. They haven't been killed by the hostage takers, rather they have been killed because of the military operation. Now, there has been a tremendous pressure on Netanyahu within Israel to get the hostages released. The families of the hostages and in general the Israeli society have been putting tremendous pressure. Despite that, what we see there is very clear, and I think I've been saying that this in my previous comments, and what we've seen with all that has happened so far. Those comments have been mostly validated in terms of the Israeli strategy, which seems to be still very much intact. And the strategy is, first of all, Netanyahu, fighting for his political survival, wanted to put up a brave face and to show to his people that he can destroy Hamas. So what they've done is they've started from the north, and the strategy has been simple. First, the airstrikes, shock and awe type of airstrikes, and then there's a ground assault, and this has been happening, and gradually they've been moving to the south. Now this city, Rafah, is the southerlymost city of the Gaza Strip. The original population was 280,000, but now that everybody, because of this relentless military action that the Israelis are conducting, the population all moved there. Now, as you said, there are 1.4 million people, mostly living in tents and shelters and in totally humanitarian conditions. 28,000 have been killed. In terms of wounded, if we add the numbers, then the numbers get to about 110,000. And this is out of the total population of about 2 million. So this is a tragedy which is unfolding. But the Israeli strategy, and as you've very rightfully, you had given a summary of the international pressure which has been there, and the recent ones in terms of the statements emanating from all the different capitals, that whether it's Joseph Borrell or President Biden himself, or Secretary Blinken, or the Egyptians, or the Jordanians, everyone, like the Qataris or UAE, Saudis. But despite that, and of course the tremendous pressure that was generated within the United Nations. There have been debates in the UNSC. There have been votings. Of course, the Americans have been vetoing all the different attempts, and nothing significant came out of it other than some resolutions calling for resumption of humanitarian aid. Despite all that, and despite these huge numbers that we've seen in terms of casualties, the Israeli operation has still been intact. In fact, just yesterday, they, as per the Palestinian sources, about 100 people have been killed.
Intact.
Yeah.
But with the motives achieved or not?
Now, that is a very interesting point. You see, what their stated objectives are that they would destroy Hamas's military capacity, number one, and secondly, its capacity to rule the Gaza Strip, which it has been doing since 2007. Now, let's see how far they've succeeded in that. They claim that they have so far eliminated anywhere from 8 to 10,000. In fact, in a recent statement, the Israelis claimed that for every civilian casualty that has taken place, they have taken out one Hamas soldier, so to speak. These are the Israelis' claim. Now, in terms of the on-ground situations, they're also claiming that, okay, most of the Hamas soldiers, and the numbers are, claimed to be anywhere from 25 to 30,000 originally, they have been moving with the population. And now the Israelis claim they're concentrated, before they were in Khan Yunis, and now from Khan Yunis they have moved to Rafah. And Rafah is the end of the game, because after that, it's basically Egypt or the sea. So they claim that this is the last stronghold of Hamas, their military capacity, and they are going to destroy that. But what we see, on the other hand, is reemergence of Hamas in the north that the Israelis had already cleared, so to speak. So I think
the objectives haven't been met.
As independent analysts, these objectives would remain elusive. They have not been fully met, partially perhaps, yes. But because, see, these type of organizations, it's not just military strength, it is an ideology. It is the public support that they have. So the Israelis would have to go beyond what they're doing in terms of if they really want to exterminate that ideology. And eventually, I think they would have to move towards some type of peace process. But of course, that is not going to happen in the short term, or perhaps even in the medium term. But what I believe is that the Israelis will continue this operation. Now they're saying what they're saying now, their short-term objectives too. They're saying they want to destroy the tunnel network, which is a huge, which is called the Gaza Metro or whatever, thousands of kilometers of tunnels that that they say house the Hamas military capacity and the command and control capacity, the facilities. The second thing they say they're going to have the hostages released. And because yesterday they were able to get 2 of the hostages back because of the operation they launched. So, they've been in a way, now Netanyahu can claim, look, I've got some more. And, but we also have to remember.
At the cost of what? At the cost of what? Let me proceed with the discussion. I'll
please.
come back to you to discuss some other very important aspects to this particular brutality that is being unleashed by Israeli regime on innocent Gazans. General Masood, now there is a statement when we talk about the Israeli offensive, specifically on the last city, this particular city of Rafah. UN humanitarian coordinator has said that people in Rafah would have nowhere to go if Israeli troops launched their offensive. The safe areas that were declared are no longer safe. And if these people have to move, where can they move? We are really fearful of the horrific nature of where we are could only get worse. General Masood, first of all, where should these innocent people of Gaza go? And secondly, as we were discussing, has Israel been able to achieve its objectives it's set at the outset of this particular offensive in the Gaza Strip? General Masood, can you hear me, please?
That is only a temporary solution. The thing is that Israel has to be constrained, and they have to go back where they really belong, And for that, I think the international community, and especially the United States, has to play a very major role in trying to constrain Israel from not making the lives of these Palestinians so miserable. And actually, targeting Hamas and targeting the entire Palestinian community is extremely unfair and unjust. And what surprises us is that how the international community continues to sort of really, if not support, but indirectly sort of encourage Israel to continue with its hostility to a point where I think for these people of Palestine and the people of Gaza, it has become miserable and life has become so difficult. And what is also very surprising, that the Muslim countries have not raised concern to the extent that they should. And they should have gone to the UN Security Council and kept on pressing and at least bring some moral pressure on Israel. And so I think America also has double standards, and so has the Western world. We are really very disturbed about this because it has long-term consequences. It is not just a question of Palestine and Hamas and Gaza. It's a question of how the Muslim world also is reacting to that, how passive they are, not in the sense that we want them to sort of engage militarily or to enlarge the conflict, but what we are saying is that they should try to bring about some sanity amongst, and peace and harmony in the region. And even if Hamas and its followers and the Palestinians are, subjected to such tyranny and that they are exhausted and they are in no position to retaliate, there will be an inner feeling for years to come, for generations, there will be a sort of enmity. And you don't want that. You want people to live in peace. You want both Israelis and the Palestinians to have a common goal. That is not
right,
possible.
Jana Masood, in that particular regard, when we talk about the role and the expectations, when we talk specifically of the United States of America, with the sort of statements which have come forth specifically from President Joe Biden, earlier we saw that he warned Israeli regime of alienating itself from the international support because of its disproportionate bombardment in the Gaza Strip. Now, the recent statements by US President also warning against the offensive to be launched in Rafah. Also, he has said that Israel's bombardment of Gaza is over the top last week in that particular statement. When such sort of statements come from US President Joe Biden and the United States being the staunch ally of Israel, so what is expected when we talk about this particular problem taken to the United Nations Security Council? Over there, it was the United States of America at that time that vetoed those resolutions calling for a ceasefire. So what's expected from them?
Yeah, I think you really brought a very interesting point, that on one hand, the United States really was the only country, in fact, which amongst the big, five, to have sort of vetoed the resolution which asked for a ceasefire and was completely, fully siding with the Israelis and their, aggressive stance. But at the same time, I think there is a realization now that there are international forces and the repercussions of what Israel is doing in the entire, not only in the Muslim world, but in the entire region, has serious consequences. And so I think this is how they are looking at it now and trying to bring about some sort of sanity and peace in the region. To what extent this change of mind and the pressure that they will exert on Israel will bring results, only time will tell.
Right, Jana Masood, when we talk about the earlier stance of the United States of America as to it calling Israel's right to defend itself, Afterwards, do you see any sort of a shift by looking at these statements now, which are coming forth recently, especially by President Joe Biden? Do you see a shift in the US policy, especially towards Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's vow of continuing with this offensive from that particular support at the start of this particular offensive towards these statements now? Do you think the US administration at some point is getting frustrated with what Netanyahu is up to?
You're very right. In fact, the main reason, as I think, is that the Israeli community within the United States now thinks that what the Israeli government and Netanyahu his policies have been very detrimental in the larger interest of Israel, as well as the reputation of the Jewish community. So I think they are trying to sort of put pressure also, and that is the reason what has given President Joe Biden, the strength to sort of speak now in a different tone, or at least in a modified tone, towards this conflict, and saying that the policies that Benjamin Netanyahu is pursuing are not in the interest of Israel, or in the interest of the region, or in the interest of, in a way, America.
Right, we are joined by another participant in the show, Dr. Haq Shamsi, is senior analyst. Dr. Shamsi, thank you very much for joining in at Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. You definitely have gone through the latest statements coming from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that he deems that victory is in reach. And by launching an offensive in Rafah, there were international warnings by the world leaders also against that particular launch of the offensive in Rafah in particular, where over 1.4 million Gazans are now crammed in. Do you think Israel has achieved those objectives it had set at the very outset when it launched that offensive on Gaza on 8th of October, and victory is indeed in reach for them?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Jawad. What is victory? You have to analyze that. And in what sense? If killing people is victory, then they should have dropped the atomic bomb and everything was finished. They would have become a victor. That is not victory. Okay, this is genocide. All right, and America is part of it. You were just referring to Joe Biden's statements. It's a double standard statement. It is hypocritical statement. He cannot and he will never oppose any sitting government in Israel. Yes, Israelis themselves can change the opinion and remove their gun. Few weeks back, I contributed a theory in academia, and it is referred as fear and tear. This is what Israel and America do. Okay, they first create fear among the people who they think might oppose them, and after that they go after their target and tear them apart, and that is what they are doing in Gaza and now in Rafah, on the Rafah crossing. They know that from Rafah onwards these people have nowhere to go, isn't it? That is why they will try and eliminate them, because they just need land. They just need land. They are inhuman people. They are insane people. And he is a war criminal. Israel, in fact, is a criminal state, inherently criminal state. And that is what he is doing. If he is claiming victory by killing children and destroying schools and hospitals, yes, he is a winner. If that is the standard of his victory, and that is accepted by the so-called civilized democracies and developed West, then yes, he is a winner.
There have been statements by other world leaders also, not only specifically the US President Joe Biden, also EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell has also said that if that particular offensive specifically in Rafah would be launched, it would lead to an unspeakable humanitarian situation. Some sort of also similar sort of statement coming from UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron also. I mean, at the very outset of this, the kind of support that was actually shown by the Western world towards Israel for its right to defend itself, don't you see a shift in that particular tone over the course of past 4 months?
I mean, we are not interested in seeing that shift. We are interested that the bombing should stop immediately. The war should stop immediately. Atrocities should stop immediately. Genocidal killings should stop immediately. These statements have no weight. If David Cameron thinks so, why shouldn't he call the UN Security Council? He can also activate. Why is he waiting that OIC countries will call? OIC countries will not call. Why? Fear and tear. Netanyahu has created fear in the hearts and minds of all the Muslim states.
Okay, let me proceed with the discussion. Mr. Saleem, when we talk about this, do you also feel a shift in the tone when we talk about the earlier statements, especially of the US administration and now, which are coming forth? And if yes, do you think the shift in the tone would actually also lead into the shift into a practical action in order to stop Israel from pressing ahead further?
I think I've been saying it for quite some time now that first of all, when we analyze international relations, sometimes we have to do it a bit dispassionately and understand the rules of the game, as unfortunately the game is played internationally. Number one, here, they're saying all politics is local. What that means is that the domestic politics of countries or the domestic politics of the national leaders translates into their actions internationally. And this is a prime example of that. Netanyahu's position within Israel, which is threatened, and his battle for political survival is spilling out. That's number one. That's very, very important, a key point that is playing in this unfortunate saga. Number two, what we saw initially was, of course, in the initial phase, within the Western world, there was a lot of condemnation of the Hamas 7th October actions. And they basically condoned the first phase of Israel's military action, despite the death toll, despite the destruction and the havoc it created. But gradually, as the numbers of casualties increased, and gradually as the media reports came out about the devastation that was being caused, about the human suffering and misery that was being caused, the way the humanity was suffering in Gaza, of course the perception started changing. And then we started seeing more and more noises coming from Western countries. And I think we don't even have to see the recent statements. Even months from before, we saw strong statements from US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, for instance, Secretary Blinken, many European leaders. And they have been gradually getting stronger. And now we see a statement from the US President himself, which before, the tone which is different. But having said that, you still have to remember that there was a 45 minutes phone conversation recently between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And they say it's reported that 2/3 of that conversation, like 30 minutes of that conversation, was about the hostages, which are still with Hamas. And that's a very critical element here. The second thing is within the back channel diplomacy that is going. What Hamas has proposed now, what they recently proposed was like they're talking about a long pause, humanitarian pause or whatever you call. The Israelis don't want to use the word ceasefire. The Americans are not using the word ceasefire. The Westerns are not. They're using the word humanitarian pause, a long humanitarian pause. But practically it could be the same. Now, the Hamas leadership, they said, okay, 3 phases, 45 days each. And, of course, that would include the resumption of the aid, the humanitarian aid, then a free movement of sort of people within Gaza, and other sort of like conditions to back to normalization. And as a quid pro quo, they would release a major chunk of the hostages that they still have. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister, what has been his response? He has called this delusional, because in his view, this is like much more than what they can ask at this point in time. Having stated that, still the Americans are conducting, these negotiations through countries like Qatar, for example, perhaps Egyptians, UAE, other, indirect channels. And Hamas leadership, we have to remember, they're still in Qatar, in other countries. So that is going on. We hope, our biggest hope should be at this point in time, that these negotiations lead to something substantive. Because what we have seen on the other side, we can come up with very strong statements, like on these programs, but they wouldn't matter at all. The leadership of Muslim countries can come up with strong statements, they wouldn't matter at all. What has happened in the United Nations Security Council, in the United Nations General Assembly, in the ICJ, in a lot of international forums, it was not nothing. It was quite significant. But at the end of the day, it has not mattered. And Israel has a long history of ignoring international public opinion. In Israel, you know what they call United Nations? They call it United Nothing. So I think what we have to all, the pressure has to be sustained by the Muslim countries, by the Western countries, but the Muslim countries and the Western countries also have to facilitate the negotiation that has been going at the back end. And then, I think all the efforts should be that some humanitarian pause is arrived at through these negotiations, because that is the only chance we have.
Right. General Masood, now, as already you are of the view that you see a shift in that particular tone when we talk about the United States of America's administration at the very outset of this particular offensive and after a couple of months now. Do you see that shift in tone turning into a shift in a concrete action, and US taking some practical measures in order to stop Israeli regime from continuing to press ahead with this offensive?
Well, I think they are doing something. They are taking some practical steps in order to put pressure on Israel, but not sufficient. And I think, the Prime Minister of Israel is least pushed about what the Americans think, because he knows that they are going to support me in any case, because that has been the tradition of the Americans and tradition of the Western world to support Israel in all its atrocities. And but nonetheless, realizing that there is also, as I said, I think earlier as well, that there is within America, even the Israeli, even the Jewish community is very much dissatisfied with the way that the Prime Minister Netanyahu is Benjamin is really conducting himself. I think he has really crossed all limits and conducting himself in such a ruthless and atrocious manner, which should be a shame and will go down in history as one of the worst periods of the policies being pursued by Israel. This is not to say that Hamas is not to be blamed, and some of their leaders are also equally responsible for creating conditions. But that does not give Israel a cover to really butcher the poor Palestinians and people of Gaza and throw them out of their homes in thousands and thousands. And this is the most inhuman action that they have conducted after several years, although this is more of a repeat of one of the earlier, assaults that Israel made on this Palestinians and Hamas. But I think this one exceeds all bounds of civilized behavior. What to talk of civilized behavior, but I think ruthless, atrocious behavior.
Right, General Masood, now as we speak of the expectations, especially from the United States of America in regard to this particular offensive, now there is a report that has been published by Sky News, an international broadcaster. It is quoting its partner in the United States of America, NBC News. It has given a report through sources and which says that President Biden has used very strong language in private conversations about Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he has also clearly grown frustrated and has shown contempt for the Israeli leader behind the closed doors. There is a rebuttal by the US National Security Council regarding these claims of this particular report. Now, in a supposed scenario, if the United States president is having contempt for Israeli Prime Minister at this point in time, and Prime Minister Netanyahu happening to be difficult to be dealt with, what possible options the United States of America has in its hands now if it sincerely thinks that it should actually intervene with some concrete measures?
Well, I think it's not surprising at all, and I think it was already known in a way, public, that President Joe Biden is putting immense pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister. But that aside, the fact remains that he also cannot go public and sort of criticize him too much, because he realizes that there are consequences for his own election, forthcoming election, and otherwise too. So I think despite that, one is hoping, and President Biden strongly believes that I think in the next elections he might lose. But the problem with Israel at the moment is that even if Prime Minister Netanyahu loses, the next one who is coming is equally very hostile and may even take positions just as bad or even worse than what the present Prime Minister has been sort of implementing or has been responsible for. So I think the future is very, very, you cannot really predict the future except to say that things probably will continue to get worse, if not better. And the other thing is that what is the Arabs doing? What are the Middle Eastern countries doing? Why don't they raise their voice? Why doesn't the Muslim Ummah and Muslim countries also play their role in at least stopping this genocide, near genocide that has taken place? So I think we also are failing. I just would not blame others because I think we are also responsible. Not only responsible in the sense that we are not, pushing forward, pressing more, that there should be sanity, there should be peace, there should be an understanding that, you can't punish an entire population, but also a realization that, you cannot deal with people like this. So I think the weakness...
Masood, as we saw these events unfolding in past last 4 months, we had seen Pakistan at the international fora raising voice and condemning the brutality of Israel in the strongest possible terms. Also, there was a detailed condemnation and the recommendations which were given by Organization of Islamic Cooperation also regarding this particular offensive of Israel. Also, back and forth, we have seen very strong statements, condemnations coming from the Muslim countries, the leading countries in this particular region also. What other options do you think how Muslim countries can make Israel to stop its offensive?
Well, I think what you say is correct, but at the same time, I think there has to be some sort of a pressure besides just, making statements. Because if you, I would say that there have to be some sanctions against countries which conduct themselves completely contrary to international principles of justice and fair play. I think you cannot let this sort of a thing happen. And poor, people of Palestine and people of, Gaza, they have been subjected to such atrocities. How can the, neighboring countries, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, can tolerate all this? This shows that there is very lack of sensitivity towards injustice
Right.
at the moment. And
Your
I
point
think
is, please go ahead. Please complete your thought. General Masood, please go ahead. Please complete your thought.
Yeah, I think there is also a need that the OIC and all these should become more effective in terms and just not be organizations which have no weight. And I think China and Russia also did not play any role. They really stayed more or less neutral. And I think that is also very worrying, because we were expecting that China should really also put its weight behind, not on any side or prefer any side, but should say that these atrocities are unacceptable. And I think that by itself would have been a great contribution and would have raised the prestige and image of China.
So what about that particular vote that happened at the United Nations Security Council as well as the United Nations General Assembly also? So when specifically talking about the United Nations Security Council, it was the United States of America only that vetoed the resolution for the ceasefire, not the other members of the P5, including China. So,
well, I think if I remember correctly, they absented themselves. They did not vote for either, So I think they not voting in that resolution by itself showed that they also want to sort of remain neutral and not play any role. They don't want to sort of annoy Israel in a way, because they have vested interests in terms of commerce and also they themselves are not so good at.
Your point is well taken, General Masood. Dr. Shamsi, now options at the hands of the United States of America. If President Joe Biden is actually getting more frustrated and Prime Minister Netanyahu is turning out to be very difficult to be dealt with, what practical measures, if once for all the United States decides that it is going to push for some concrete action to stop Israel, what could be those possible measures in the immediate term?
I think the least President Biden can do is stop vetoing the UNSC resolutions. This is the least he can do. If he is sincere in his change of stance or his frustration towards the Israeli Prime Minister, this is the least he can do. On the other hand, there are two things that stops nations from going to war. One is deterrence and the other is diplomacy. In this case, both are failing and both have failed. Initially, Israeli's deterrence on Hamas failed and Hamas attacked. And subsequently, Israel does not get deterred either by ICJ or by UNSC or by UNGA or any international public opinion. They don't get deterred. That is why the war is continuing, genocide is continuing. Coming to diplomacy, diplomacy never sleeps. It has to perform. And it is working. I am not saying that diplomats are not working all around the world. Qatar is actively working and trying to, but it needs to be supported. More focused support is required, like General Saab said, from China, Russia. But Russia, we can understand, they're busy in the Ukraine war. But China must, and OIC, all the Arab countries.
So what about ICJ? Where do you see, I mean, there were clearly certain rulings asking Israel to follow certain steps.
They're non-binding. As Excellency said before, that Israel has a history of not accepting international public opinion and resolutions. So it is, I'm not surprised that they are not listening to ICJ. They will never listen to ICJ. If they don't listen to UN,
isn't there any sort of a mechanism in place that could be implemented in order to make a certain country about which the ruling or certain observation by International Court of Justice has come forth?
UNSC and the countries which are supporting outrightly Israel, entire Western world and the US. Only they can pressurize Israel. We cannot, I mean the Arab world cannot, OIC cannot, Muslim countries cannot, China cannot, Russia cannot, but US-led Western world can pressurize Israel. And if they are sincere in their approach, like as you mentioned that the stance is changing or their perception is changing, then they should act also. Because simple statements,
Right.
I mean, I will take it as hypocrisy.
Mr. Saleem, do you see these particular observations which were already made and certain rulings which were made towards Israel by the International Court of Justice, again, blatant violation of those also till this point in time? Do you see after any final verdict or a ruling in this particular regard comes later on by the ICJ, it would have any sort of effect?
I think when the rulings were made, they were like, there were caveats in those rulings, and that has given Israel time. I would again say that, you know, like, if wishes were horses, the poor would ride, they say, you know. So we can all wish that, you know, like, certain countries should do more, or, you know, the government should do more, the international agencies, including the UN, should do more. I think they've already done what they could in terms of their effectiveness, the level of effectiveness which is there. As far as China is concerned, I think General Talat perhaps forgot that China was the first country which categorically spoke about a two-state solution in the very beginning of this crisis, when no other country was talking about that. And they took a very clear stance within the UNSC as well. They did vote for the resolutions as well. But of course, you know, the American vetoing there, and the fact that the Western countries would water down the resolution, because it's a bit, the resolution is not just presented like that. There's a lot of negotiation which takes place before a resolution is presented. But the important point here is, I think, that the countries involved, through their pressure or through facilitation, they need to strengthen the process, the back channel diplomacy which is going on. In fact, some of the statements, I would refer to those coming from the US State Department, from US National Security Office as well, regarding the diplomacy for the humanitarian pause which is ongoing. And they said that while the gaps still remain, I'm you know, quoting words to the fact,
Right.
A lot of progress has been made.
A lot of progress has been done, and it's expected
Yeah.
by the world community at large that there should be some immediate progress in regard to this particular conflict. Unfortunately, we are short of time, and I'll have to end the show over here. Mr. Jauhar Saleem, former ambassador, thank you very much for being with us on the show. Dr. Haq Shamsi, senior analyst, thank you very much for your time. And Lieutenant General retired Talat Masood, senior analyst. General Masood, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.